Hey everyone, Ryan Young, KAATARO Jiu Jitsu. I hope you're doing well. So this video is about, I guess, the difference between learning Jiu Jitsu with self-defense in mind and learning it with a sport in mind. And I'm actually using, as an aid here, a video that was set up by, that I found on Facebook by a gentleman named Brian Conley. And I take it he's a submission grappler. So here's the video. Okay, so we saw this video, and what I wanted to do with this for the topic today is look at Jiu Jitsu from both a self-defense side and a sports side. So my contention is that since about 2000, 2005, there began to be an actual, in the US at least, a split in Jiu Jitsu where you have one side that does the traditional self-defense Jiu Jitsu, also called Gracie Jiu Jitsu or GJJ, and then the other side that was the bigger part of it now, and that's the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or BJJ. Now, don't get confused in that both forms of Jiu Jitsu that we know as today, as of today, originated in Brazil with the Gracie family, or with there's another line as well, as we call the Fada line, and I think they eventually merged under one umbrella, but they both learned the original judo of the time, or as it was called then, Jiu-Jitsu, from one of the Japanese black belts that were around at the time, whether it be Kande Koma, also known as Mitsuya Maeda, or Gio Omori, who's another one that was there. But they all learned Jiu-Jitsu and then took it from there. So now as Jiu-Jitsu progressed through the century, because here we are about 100 years later, or a little more than that, Jiu-Jitsu is kind of different than what it was back then. So what we do at KAATARO Jiu Jitsu is that we come from the Helio Gracie side of the family, which tends to be that Jiu Jitsu is self-defense and that Jiu Jitsu is a martial art. Whereas on the other side of the family, Helio's brother, Carlos Gracie Sr., the Jiu Jitsu that tends to fall from that line tends to be more competitive. And I say tends to because the original sons of Carlos, or nephews of Helio, all learned the same Jiu-Jitsu that Helio's sons did. It's just what they did with that knowledge is where the difference comes. So one side of the family thought the best way to spread the art was through sport, because a lot of times when you do things in a sport fashion, it makes it more available to the masses. And it's not to say that traditional Gracie Jiu Jitsu is not available to the masses. It's just that there are the IBJJF, which is the big organization, the biggest organization right now in tournaments. Although you have ADCC, submission grappling, you have Jiu Jitsu World League, which does both gi tournaments as well as no gi, American Grappling Federation. You have NAGA. These are all different organizations, and forgive me if I didn't name your organization. I just don't know too many of them. I only know what's in front of me today. And they work off of a set of rules. And one of the rules that has come about since, say, maybe the late 90s is the no slamming rule. Because when I started Jiu-Jitsu, and one of the first big tournaments I did was the original Pan Ams, which happened in Redondo Beach, California. And that's where you had all the Brazilian teams flying up, because there really were no Brazilian teams in the U.S. Now, all the Brazilian teams are pretty much in the U.S., right? Gracie Barra has headquartered, I think their world headquarters in Irvine, California. And you have Alliance, which is, I think, based out of Georgia. I mean, they do have a Sao Paulo arm, which is, I think, run by Fábio Gurgel. But it's like two places. They've got a Brazil headquarters and a U.S. headquarters, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't really keep up with this. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. But you've got all these schools that came up from Brazil to the U.S. to teach their brand of jiu-jitsu, and they would sanction more of these tournaments so that people could compete and have some fun doing it. So now originally, you know, I started with Helson and, you know, then moved on to the Gracie Academy and then to Hickson's. We did tournaments occasionally then, whereas now tournaments you can find, you know, in a lot of metropolitan areas, you can find a tournament every month for sure, and some even more than that, more frequent than that. But for us, tournaments weren't all that frequent. And back then, from what I understand, from what I was told by the Gracie family members that taught me, was that to them, jiu-jitsu was, you know, with the gi on for the most part, but they would take the gi off 30 days prior if they were going to do, say, a Vale Tudo fight, or if they actually did a competition, then 30 days prior to the actual competition, they would start training with a tournament in mind. And that's where the points system came in. Now, really, the rules were just that don't strike your opponent because it's a tournament, it's not a fight. But if you're doing a tournament maybe once or twice a year, and the remaining times of the year you're just training for Vale Tudo, then your jiu-jitsu is going to be different, because back then they were training for challenge matches, you know, fighting various styles of martial arts. So they were always having to be ready for fights. But as jiu-jitsu grew, then what happened was a lot of people would start training more for tournaments, because the tournaments became a moneymaker. And a lot of schools would get the reputation of being, you know, the top school because of their tournament success. So a lot of people would join jiu-jitsu because they wanted to be part of a team, and they wanted to be part of the best team. So back then, there were, I think, 4 teams that were pretty much the biggest and the most competitive, and always going to get up against each other, and they would always fight for the team trophy, and that would be Carson Gracie Sr., that would be Masters, which became Alliance, that would be Gracie Umaita, which was Hoyler and Holker Gracie, because by then their older brothers had left, and one more school that I can't remember, oh, and Gracie Baja, of course, or back then they used to be called Baja Gracie. So those are the 4 teams that would always be fighting for the team trophies because they had the most competitors on the mat. These are mostly in Brazil. In the U.S., we really had most of the tournaments in Southern California. They were run by Joe Moreira, Kleber Luciano, and the Machados would put on, I think the Machados were the ones that put on the first Pan Am. I could be wrong, but I just seem to have that impression because they were involved at the time in the administration and stuff of the actual tournament event. So my thinking is they were involved in that. So when I was in a tournament once, I think it was the Pan Am Games, one of my teammates got put into either a triangle or a choke from inside guard, and he just picked him up off the ground. And back then, slams weren't illegal, whereas in Brazil, I don't think they slammed by then. I think they had almost a fully developed rule book by then. So what happened was the Brazilians that would come to the U.S. and compete then were not used to the Americans, because the Americans were taught jiu-jitsu as if it were Vale Tudo. So I remember this one tournament to where our teammate had a guy playing guard on him and had the choke in, so he just picked him up off the ground, because we were taught when somebody picks you up off the ground, you let the choke go or you let your feet go, so you're either standing or you have your back still on the ground. Your back doesn't get lifted off the ground, because the last thing you want to do is get slammed. So he picked him up and then slammed him and knocked him out. And then we proceeded to hear a bunch of boos that were coming from the Brazilian contingent, because in their mind, slamming was a dick move. In our mind, this is self-defense. So if you're going to let me pick up off the ground like that, expect to get slammed. Well, it was shortly after that tournament that slams were outlawed, which, if you've listened to many of my videos before, you know that makes no sense to me. I get why they do that, but if this is supposed to be a martial art, you're thinking about first is your own safety, your defense, and you protect yourself first, and then, you know, when you do have position, then you're on offense, right? So like Elio and like Hickson once said, you know, both of them said it. I assume that Hickson got it from Elio, but it was work your defense. We really work defense in the beginning. because you want to be able to protect yourself. The concern is not being able to submit somebody, it's being able to protect yourself. And the saying was, if my defense is so good, then that makes me undefeatable, which means that you can never beat me. Because if I can keep defending myself, eventually I will get on top and I will be able to beat you, whether it be through strikes or submission. That's why the defensive part is so important. But for sport, and with time limits involved, and with the various rule set that's been put in, defense is no longer really taught. It's more offense. It's probably 8 out of 10 times you're learning offense. And about 2 out of 10 times, if even that much, you're learning defense. Whereas for us, in the beginning, as a beginner jiu-jitsu person, you're starting off pretty much at 100% defense. And as your time gets put in, we start to add more offense in there, to the point where by the time you've gotten to blue belt, you're looking at about 2/3, 1/3. Right? Defense is 2/3 of the time, 1/3 is offense. And then when you get to blue belt, then it's more offense and just getting your defense to be better. But the new concepts when you get to blue and purple are more offensive in nature, whereas in white belt, it's primarily defensive in nature. Because the thinking is that, with Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, with us included, it's always been, by the time you get to blue belt, you should be street ready. Purple belt, you're street proficient, right? As in, if you get into a confrontation, you can deal with it. Now, a lot of schools that are sport-oriented don't really operate with that mindset. Their thing is just win tournaments and bring home gold medals, or do any kind of medal that you can and just win. And with that slam that you saw, in my mind, I'm looking at it from 2 different lenses. Lens 1 is the guy that has the triangle, who went for the triangle, and he's trying to submit the guy. And in a sport, in a tournament, not the one that you saw in video, you can not slam someone, which means that if you have a triangle on someone, someone stands up and picks you up, they can't slam you unless they're willing to accept the DQ. So what happens a lot of times is the person playing guard will hold the position even though they're in a very vulnerable spot, because they know that if they hold it, the guy can't legally slam them, legally meaning in terms of the book, a book of rules, not legally in a court of law. But they can't slam you, so just hold on to the triangle. Same thing happens when you're playing guard and you got 2 hands in the collar and you're setting the choke up. You got closed guard and you got the hands in and you have them close in over here, and they just go and stand up and pick you up. It would make sense in a tournament for you to just hold the choke, because it takes about 3 to 4 seconds, they say, to finish choke, and that it's just another second or 2 and then he'll finish. Because if he slams me, then he'll be disqualified. Here's the way I look at it. If you are in somebody's guard, they have a choke in on you and you pick them up, and that choke is deep, you're going to lose. The question is, how are you going to lose? Are you going to lose by submission, or are you going to lose by disqualification, right? And that's a tough one, because on the one hand, you have one person, in the video that we just saw, the person who picked the guy up and slammed him, he's approaching jiu-jitsu as combat, right? At least that's my impression of it. This gentleman, Brian, he can correct me if I'm wrong, whereas the other one who put the triangle on, he's treating it as a sport. And as a result, he did not undo his legs, and as soon as he felt himself get lifted up, he should have just went legs open, arms open, let his back fall to the ground and fight from there. That's the old live to fight another day. Now, he did get slammed really hard. Luckily for him, the person who slammed him did not slam him on the back of his neck or on his head. Instead, slammed him flat on his back. Now, the person playing guard did have a strong enough neck to where his head didn't hit the ground and he didn't end up getting knocked out. If you want to see something like that, then look up on YouTube or Google or whatever, look for Quinton Rampage Jackson versus Ricardo Arona. So this is a fight that happened maybe 20 years ago, and it was in Pride. And Ricardo Arona slapped a nice triangle on Rampage, and instantly, as if Rampage was ready for this, he just picked him up, and Rampage is probably over 6 foot tall, and Arona was higher than that, right? His head might have been 7 foot high, and Rampage slammed him with violence. I mean, it was hard, it was brutal. And as soon as it happened, as soon as on the impact, Arona got knocked out. Now, what's another example? UFC, going way back to when Carlos Newton was the welterweight champ, and he went up against Matt Hughes. Now, those of us who watched Matt Hughes fight in the UFC, we all know he would pick guys up and he put them on his shoulders, and he'd walk to the center of the ring and he would literally slam them on the ground and try to knock them out. Well, Carlos Newton went and put a triangle on him. He was very good at triangles, and he held the triangle, and he had it in deep, right? But he held it, and Matt Hughes picked him up with the thought that he was going to slam him. Well, he picked him up, started the slam, and passed out. But the slam was already starting, so Matt Hughes passed out in Newton's triangle, and Newton hit the ground hard to the point where he got knocked out. So both of them were out. One was knocked out, like concussive style, and Matt Hughes was knocked out because he got put to sleep. Well, you know how it is. When you get put to sleep, you usually wake up in a few seconds. So they slammed, and both of them were like this on the ground. Just that Matt Hughes woke up first, and that's how he became the welterweight champ, believe it or not. It was through a slam. So now knowing this and seeing this, it just puzzles me as to why instructors will instruct their students to hold on to stuff like that. Now, granted, you could say because it's illegal to slam. But if you're that one person and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to lose either way. I'm going to either lose by submission, meaning I submit to this guy's choke or triangle, or I'm going to lose by DQ. I don't know, right? Me, myself, I don't want to lose either way. But, I go back to, a story that Rickson once told about what happened when he and Halls, his brother, Halls Gracie, had entered a wrestling match. I think they were trying maybe the Olympic trials or something for Brazil. And from what I understand, Halls went up against the guy who ended up winning it all at their weight class. And he was, good, right? Best in Brazil. And I guess Halls had gone up against him and lost, in the match. Got pinned or something like that, or just maybe points. I have no idea how he lost. But Rickson went up against him later on because they might have been in opposite brackets, and Rickson probably met up with this guy in the championship match. Well, Halls put him aside and told him, this guy's too good. You're not going to beat him under these rules. So what he told Rickson was, and I still kind of chuckle about this, told him it's better to be disqualified than to lose. So then the story has it, as the story goes, Rickson went up against this wrestler, referee in between, referee blows the whistle or starts them, and Rickson proceeds to slap him in the face hard. And then he got disqualified. So the thought process that Halls had given Rickson was, you're going to lose, better to lose by disqualification than to lose by pin or by points. So that's how Rickson chose to lose, by slapping him. Now, in a tournament, you really never know what your opponent is thinking. So if you let him pick you up off of the ground, you're now at his mercy. You're at his mercy for him to follow the rules and not care about getting disqualified. Me personally, I don't want to put my trust in a stranger in a match, which is why I teach all of our students, if you're playing guard and you've got that choke in there, at least unhook your legs. So if he does pick you up, he picks you up to your feet. So now you're standing and you still got your hands in the collar. If the collar choke was in deep, then one more second of standing, he'll tap out, right? But he won't be able to slam you. Or if the hands just got in, he stood up to pick you up, just release your hands, right? Maybe you can keep your closed guard, but release your hands so your back goes right back to the ground. I always tell my students, the minute or the second you feel your back comes off the ground, let something go and go back, right? Better to fall 6 inches than to fall 6 feet, as what happened in this video that I put as a companion to this video. Once again, I want to thank Brian Conley for putting this up on his Facebook page, because it gave us great material to work with. So for those of you who are looking to learn jiu-jitsu, make sure you go to the school that serves you the way you want to be served. Meaning, if you want to compete and you want to be a competitor and you want to learn jiu-jitsu and also, you know, get to find something competitive that you could be good at, then look for a school that specializes in sport. You know, one that goes to tournaments regularly that you can attend. If you want to learn jiu-jitsu as a means of self-defense, then I would probably say that may not be the one that checks off 10 out of 10 boxes, right? It may check off 5. So I would then consider a school that tends to tailor its curriculum, if it has one, which it should, toward self-defense. Or Vale Tudo, which is Vale Tudo in Portuguese, from what I understand, is anything goes, right? Vale Tudo. So it was when, you know, the old days of Gracies would fight. The only rules would be no biting, no eye gouging, and often no groin pinches, but you could punch the groin if you wanted to. You could punch it, you could kick it, but you just couldn't grab it and pinch it or whatever. But there were fights that would happen and bites would happen, or eye gouges would happen, right? Remember that, I think it was Vale Tudo 2000. I'm not sure. It was the one that Hickson went in, Yuki Nakai went in, Gerard Gordeau, Gary Goodridge. And it was the subject of the video, the movie called Choke, right? You can find that on YouTube. At least you should be able to. Just put Hickson Gracie Choke. And it's a long movie, and it's just kind of showing how this is Vale Tudo, Brazilian style, except I think they wore gloves. That was the only regulation they required. But there were no weight classes, and there was very few rules. And in fact, Yuki Nakai, who was the smallest guy in the tournament, probably about my size, and I saw him in real life, and he's maybe an inch taller than me. That's about it. But he was fighting Gerard Gordeau, who is kind of a dirty fighter, because by then we've known he's a dirty fighter. And I wouldn't say dirty, because it's street fighting to him, right? It's violence. He fought in a UFC against Hoist. I want to say it was maybe UFC 2, and 1 or 2. I'm not sure anymore. And when Hoist was mounted on him, he bit Hoist. And that's why you might, and he never, I don't know if he said anything, but when he did end up taking Gordeau's back, he sunk a rear naked choke in and just held it and made Gordeau kept tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping, you know, as if to say, well, you know, you bit me, so now you're going to have to, you know, suffer. Well, it was after that he fought Yuki Nakai, and Yuki was going for the heel hook on him. So he was on his back. He was trying to do it from guard. So Gordeau, from what I saw, he would punch Yuki in the face, but he'd punch with his thumb like this, so that when he'd punch, he would stab an eye. Well, what happened was Yuki ended up losing that eye. But he kept fighting, because that's just kind of how the way it is. So when he got poked in the eye, the ref would say, hey, don't do that, don't do that. But the fight would go on. Whereas if it happens in the UFC, right, it happens, and then the ref immediately stops the match, gives the guy, you know, 5 minutes or whatever to, you know, see if he can get his eyesight back. The same thing happens with a groin kick or punch. When that happens, then, you know, they automatically stop and they go, okay, yeah, you know, my groin got hit, so they get a stoppage by the ref and they get time break. Whereas in that Vale Tudo tournament, there was no stopping. They just kept going. And the same thing happened in Brazil when they do those fights. They'd agree upon the rules, but there are often times when the rules weren't followed because somebody was desperate, and it would keep going. So when you train jiu-jitsu, you know, I've heard it said before, you know, by a pretty prominent multiple world champion, when somebody had asked about, you know, the whole self-defense thing versus what they do. And this guy's pure sport. I mean, I've seen it jiu-jitsu. He doesn't do any kind of Vale Tudo or anything, at least not that I've seen. And somebody had asked him, hey, you know, what happens if one of your students gets into a street fight? Will they do all this stuff that they're doing in tournaments? Oh, no, they won't. They'll know what to do, which is not true, because you're going to do what you're trained to do. And case in point, If you look at the match, it happened probably about 20 years ago now, if you can find it on YouTube now. It was Ryron Gracie versus Cameron Earl. So Cameron Earl was Ralph Gracie's best student at the time, and they competed a lot. I would see them down in Southern California coming down to compete all the time. Well, Ryron Gracie had set up a tournament under a different rule set, closer to the original tournament rule set where slammings were allowed. And what happened was Cameron Earl jumped guard on Ryron, and Ryron kind of, his face was like, oh, I can't believe you're doing this. So he picked Cameron Earl up off of the ground, and Cameron Earl held on. And there was a violent slam after that, to the point where Cameron Earl got knocked out cold. But that's all it took, right? Because what's the expression? The whole thing about judo and wrestling is that the ground hits harder than any punch. And in this case, it was true. He got slammed, hit his head, got knocked out, probably had a concussion, but it was all within the rule set that allowed it. So if you're used to training with a very defined, very strict rule set that puts you in a box this in a box this big, then when the rule set is cut down and it expands to where more things are allowed, if you're trained only to deal with these circumstances, you're not going to be able to deal with the circumstances that are outside of your little box that you compete in. So I would recommend to you that if your school does not do the type of training that would allow you to be safe, right? Give up the position sometimes. Give it up so that you can be safe. Let the guard go, right? If they don't teach you that, then if self-defense is your objective, then you might want to go somewhere else, right? Or ask your instructor to incorporate those things, and you yourself as a trainer, train with that in mind. Train with it being a fight. So one other thing, and one other hint I can give you is, if your opponent inadvertently hits you, right? Maybe he's going from side control one side to side control the other side, and along the way, one of his knees just hits you in the face, right? What I would do is I would take the hit, and they go, oh, shoot, Ryan, I'm sorry. And I just be like, that's okay, keep going, right? It hurt. But my thinking is, okay, what if I'm in a fight and if I get a knee to the face because I wasn't protecting myself, or I get punched and it's a good punch, am I going to just stop and say, stop, I'm done? You know, or why'd you do that? It's like, no, it's a fight. So you have to be with the mindset of it's a fight and I'm going to keep fighting. So if you get hit, even if it hurts, keep fighting. Now, if it's a hospital stay, you know, I remember I had one student who has since passed, on his own, not having to do with jiu-jitsu. He broke his finger, training with another member. Broke his finger, and they stopped, and he sat there on the chair, and he's saying, should I go to the ER? And this was, 30 minutes in the class. So I wanted him to keep training, but at the same time, I want to leave it up to him, because I don't want to tell him something to do that is past his desire to train, or past his desire to better himself, right? You want to better yourself in increments, but you have to know what you can handle, what you cannot handle. So what I told him was this. I said, look, your finger's broken, right? So we popped it back in by then, so his finger was straight. So I said, now, you can either continue class and then go to the emergency room after that, or you can go to the emergency room now. You decide, right? Because it's a finger, we reset it, it's gonna hurt no matter what, but you still have, as I say, you have 9 more fingers, right? So I left it up to him, and he decided to stay in class and continue to train. Ended up not going to the ER after that, just took some ibuprofen or something like that, and then splinted it. And I think that's what he did. He may have gone to the ER, I'm not sure. On the other hand, I have another student who did a forward roll, did it wrong, and landed on his shoulder. So his shoulder dislocated. So he had to go to the ER so that they could reset his shoulder. So in that case, when he says, oh yeah, my shoulder's out, but he's a tough guy. It's happened before, because he knew right away, yeah, my shoulder dislocated. And he even drove himself. I told him, let me drive you. Hold on a second. Let me leave one of the instructors in charge. I'll drive you to the ER. He said, no, I'll just drive myself. And he went and did it. Now, of course, he's a former soldier, former Army Ranger, right? So he's got very much a can-do attitude, and that ability to accept the pain and to move on after receiving the pain. In this case, a dislocated shoulder. But if you enter jiu-jitsu with the mentality that you want to be able to defend yourself, then you're not going to stop when you get accidentally hit by a training partner, because you're going to get deliberately hit by somebody in a fight. So you're going to have to be able to keep fighting. And it's all mental. Unless you're knocked out cold, it's all mental. It's just you telling yourself, keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting. But if you're knocked out, obviously you can't do it. So that's the thing I want to kind of mention to you about the differences in the schools that you look at. So anyway, that's all I got for you. Sorry this is a long video. I tried to keep this one short, but this is such an important topic that you need to keep in mind, and you need to choose your how you train and where you train accordingly. So you can visit us at either one of our campuses. We have one in Flower Mound, Texas. We call that Combat Jiu-Jitsu Dallas Fort Worth. We have one in Laguna Hills, which is Combat Jiu-Jitsu Irvine, California. And we also have our curriculum online at combatjujitsu.com. You can sign up there and you can receive our access to our videos, and they're all on Kajabi right now. So you can watch and you can do what we do. Also, if you want some coaching calls, you can reach out to me at the link that I should have in the video down below. And it's a clarity link, and I can talk to you about anything you want that I have an expertise in, I guess. So running a school, financial services, which I did for 20-25 years prior to running the jiu-jitsu school, or just mindset issues, and I'd be happy to help you with that. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Take care. Happy training. Bye now.